Less than a week before Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene resigns from office, she's making new allegations in her fallout with President Trump over the Epstein files. In a New York Times interview, Greene says Trump privately told her, quote, "My friends will get hurt if alleged abusers connected to Epstein were exposed." In a statement, the White House says, quote, "Congresswoman Greene is quitting on her constituents in the middle of her term and abandoning the consequential fight we're in. We don't have time for her petty bitterness." So for more on all this, I want to bring in our Capitol Hill correspondent, Jay O'Brien. And Jay, this New York Times piece, it's pretty meaty, 18 pages here. But what are we learning more on this this alleged conversation between the president and the Congresswoman?
So this is a phone call, Alex, that Marjorie Taylor Greene has talked about before. It comes when Marjorie Taylor Greene was one of that handful of House Republicans who were defying President Trump and signing on to legislation to force the release of the so-called Jeffrey Epstein files the Department of Justice has. This is legislation that ultimately passed, remember, the House and the Senate. And after President Trump first opposed it, he ultimately signed it into law. But in the initial stages of that effort, when Marjorie Taylor Greene was one of just those handful of Republicans stepping to the president on this issue, that's when this phone call, Greene says, took place. And as you say, she goes into more detail in this interview in the Times about it, and she says that in her recollection, President Trump said to her that one of the reasons for his opposition to the release of these Epstein files was that his quote-unquote friends could get hurt. Now, that is only Greene's recollection. We haven't heard from the president one way or the other on this, and it's been clear that Greene and the president have had a very serious falling out because of her support of the release of these Epstein files. And so putting aside the details of this call for a second, it is just another fact that Marjorie Taylor Greene and Donald Trump have had this very public breakup over this issue that at one point was critical to President Trump's MAGA base, was a campaign promise of President Trump's to put out whatever they could about the Jeffrey Epstein case, Alex.
Yeah, well, and she, by her recollection, talks about him yelling at her via speakerphone over this. But I'm curious, I mean, what are you hearing on Capitol Hill about this interview?
It's not necessarily the Epstein stuff that is really taking center stage with Republicans I talked to, not necessarily about this piece, but about the broader Trump-Greene breakup. Really what the Republicans I've talked to take issue with is Marjorie Taylor Greene's concerns that President Trump has abandoned what she says is his MAGA base. That's been something she's been saying for the last few weeks now. It's been her view that President Trump abandoned the promises he made when he ran for re-election in 2024, has left, she says, that base of voters behind, that talked about affordability, that talked about transparency when it comes to the Epstein files, and a number of other promises that President Trump made. And it's her view that President Trump has distanced himself from those voters in the pursuit of other things. Now, the Republicans I talked to on Capitol Hill largely take issue with Greene's characterization there, but they are concerned that Marjorie Taylor Greene could potentially give air cover to some other disaffected Republicans. And you might see, and it's Greene's hope that you do see, she has said this publicly, this kind of groundswell of other Republicans coming out and publicly criticizing the president, publicly taking issue with the way that he has so far conducted his second term.
Well, and listen, Greene certainly has a platform, at least for the next several days. But as we mentioned, she's not seeking re-election. She only has a few days left in Congress. So do we have any ideas to what's next for her?
She's not just not seeking re-election, she's leaving early, right? She's going to end her term on January 5th, this coming Monday. She's going to resign early. There's going to be a special election to fill that seat. So she only has a few more days left as a member of the House of Representatives. And to your point, one of the questions hanging over Marjorie Taylor Greene is what is next for her. She has said she's walking away from politics, that she's no longer going to be in the political fray. But there is this active question right now amongst Republicans, particularly in the president's MAGA coalition, of how much of a voice of opposition does Marjorie Taylor Greene become having left Congress. She won't have the platform of a sitting member of Congress, but she's obviously a household name. She was perhaps the closest to Donald Trump amongst House Republicans for such a long time. She was synonymous with the MAGA movement on Capitol Hill. So she still has a voice. And the question is, does she deploy that voice even more critically against President Trump after she has left Congress? That is a concern of some Republican leaders I've talked to.
Yeah, it'll certainly be something to watch. Jay O'Brien, thank you as always.